5 years ago, in 2020, whilst browsing the Forest of Dean family history website, I came across a black and white page. It depicted some scenes in Ruardean in the Forest of Dean in Gloucestershire. One image, located at the foot of the page, caught my attention. It depicted a large steam engine weighing about 17 tons, completely overturned on its head, lying on a hillside below a road. Even as a photograph, the accident looked shocking. The event must have been dramatic for any onlookers and really terrifying for the crew. This accident occurred on a road known as the Hollow on the steep Ruardean Hill, which lies about 3.5 miles from Cinderford and 12 miles west of Gloucester. The hill overlooks the River Wye, offering far-reaching views of the South Wales Mountains, including the Black Mountains and the Brecon Beacons. In England, the Malverns and the Cotswolds Hills can be seen. The accident on the page is dated 1918, but other sources have suggested it may have been in 1916 or 1920. One of my first thoughts was if the engine in the photograph was Fowler B5 road locomotive number 8903, the so-called Market Levington Brickyard Fowler from Wiltshire. The engine in the accident was certainly made by John Fowler of Leeds. The type is similar to a B5 road locomotive. The location was only 70 miles away from Market Levington. There was a local brickworks known as Hawkwell Brickworks, now Colford Brick and Tile Company, in nearby Cinderford. So it's plausible 8903 could have visited. On the other hand, there are no records of the engine having travelled in the area. Around 1920, 8903 was involved in a serious road accident. The damage included a bent crankshaft and was noted in the 1980 auction catalogue when the engine was sold following the death of its owner, Tom Paisley from Holywell in Huntingdonshire. W. Stern is quoted in the catalogue as saying, "An aristocrat of road locos, fast, powerful, a slightly bent crankshaft stemming from an accident during working days just mars the exhilaration of driving this engine." The offside wheel may also have been replaced at the same time, maybe because of the damage resulting from the same accident. In the Ruardean Hill photograph, the rear water tank has a repair patch, very similar to the one seen on 8903 during its restoration in the 1980s and 1990s by John Bailey of Borough Green in Kent. But on closer examination and comparing the stud spacing, the patch on 8903 looks somewhat shorter. In addition, the water hose holder on the rear of the tender in the black and white photograph looks different from the one on the engine today. So, although there are similarities, it is unlikely that the engine involved in the Ruardean Hill accident was 8903. The accident occurred in the Forest of Dean, which is a large area of ancient mixed woodland in western Gloucestershire. It is bounded by the River Wye in Herefordshire, the River Severn and the city of Gloucester. Spanning over 42 square miles, this royal forest was established by William the Conqueror around 1079. and used exclusively by the monarchy for deer and boar hunting. Over time, the local economy was based on forestry, charcoal production, iron working and coal mining. Coal mining, however, was the main employer for hundreds of years and numbered 16 pits. The hollow on Ruardean Hill is located between Ruardean and Drybrook, in the parish of Drybrook and in the county of Gloucestershire. Ruardean Hill is the highest point in the Forest of Dean, rising 951 feet above sea level. The hollow is a steep road with a 1 in 12 gradient and leads down to the village of Drybrook. The accident happened behind where the Nelson Arms pub on Morse Road used to stand. This pub was originally named after a visit by Lord Nelson to the Forest of Dean, but was demolished in 2014 to make way for new housing. So let's take a closer look at the accident photograph. Notwithstanding how serious the accident was, the scene depicted in the photograph seems remarkably calm. The men look composed. One is holding a handsaw and the other a large spade. Possibly they had already been working for some time at the site and had recovered from their ordeal, assuming they were involved in the accident themselves. There's a ladder propped up against the rear tender and a large pile of wooden sleepers in front of the engine, suggesting recovery work was proceeding. A large jack props up the near side rear wheel and another the back of the tender. A dog lies on the ground nearby, apparently unfazed by what is going on. The engine must be cold, as there's no escaping steam or water, so the fire had long been extinguished. Looking at the bushes and the tree in the background, the accident happened in the winter. There is extensive damage to the road locomotive. Several fittings on the engine are damaged. The entire wooden cab is missing, and the metal roof supports are bent. One is being held by the man on the left. The chimney is not visible, presumably buried top down in the ground by the force of the fall. The motion's covers are missing. Part of the flywheel is visible behind the man with the handsaw and may be consequently connected to a bent and damaged crankshaft. The toolbox is emptied of its contents. The lid is simply hanging down. The near side front wheel looks intact. This is remarkable, considering the steep drop and the impact from the engine's weight. After such a disaster, it seems unlikely the engine could have travelled on by itself under its own steam. According to Ken Hickson of Colford, an eyewitness account was written on the back of the original postcard. Mr. and Mrs. Herbert Smith, who lived in the cottage, which is visible in the background and shown by an arrow, were the first to arrive at the scene. Their grandson, Ken Wedley, confirmed that his grandparents pulled the driver out from under the wreckage, and Mrs. Smith cared for him until a doctor arrived. It is said the road gave way under the engine's weight. The driver, distracted while using the steam injector, was unaware of the looming danger, and the steersman didn't warn him in time. The engine had likely drifted too close to the edge, causing the hillside to give way and the engine to topple over. But it must have been a substantial collapse to cause the engine to end up on its head. The Smith cottage still stands today. In the book Highest Point of Dean by Maurice V. Bent, Roy Nelson tells the following story. Children living on the hill at school at the Slad were invited by Mr. Reed to have a ride in the engine's trailer, having delivered coke to the school. Travelling back over, he dropped the children at the top of the hill. Making his way down the hollow, the accident occurred. I understand the engine got into difficulty and the edge of the road gave way, resulting in the engine rolling over. The funnel dug into the ground, stopping the engine from rolling to the back of Mrs. Helen Allen's house. The driver, Mr. Harry Reed, got out unhurt and was taken into Mr. H. Smith's house in the hollow to be treated for shock. In a second account, Mrs. Wedley, the local postwoman, tells of the traction engine mishap in the hollow in 1918. She was the 8th child of Mr. and Mrs. Smith from the cottage opposite where the accident occurred. Her mother cared for the driver, Mr. Harry Reed, the great-grandfather of the present Mr. George Reed of Micheldean, and of how Mr. Reed miraculously escaped without being scalded, and the funnel saving the engine from turning over further. So the children of the Slad school had a fortunate escape. Slad was the informal name given to the Woodside Primary School in Ruardean Woodside. It is located on the road between Brierley and Ruardean and still exists as a school today. Based on these accounts comes the obvious question: what happened to the trailer? It is nowhere to be seen in the accident photograph. Maybe it did not fall down the slope with the engine and remained on the road. The identity of the engine is unknown, but it was certainly a John Fowler road locomotive resembling the B5 type manufactured by the company. There are 2 plates on the engine which can be seen in the photograph. One, a typical Fowler Works number plate located between the rear wheel and the belly tank toolbox. But unfortunately, it is unreadable. The second, probably a cast iron council plate, is visible near the wheel brake shaft. Donna Bailey and Ivor Barnes, grandchildren of Harry Reed of Longhope, which is about 5 miles away from where the accident happened, identified the engine as their grandfather's. Donna Bailey confirmed that Harry Reed is the man standing on the right-hand side of the photograph and that the location is indeed, as she said, up behind the Nelson Arms. Without being certain, possibly the identity of the Fowler is this one. It was photographed hauling timber and captioned in Paul Heaton's book, Road Transport, The Reed Story, with the words, "Operating this traction engine on hauling round timber, Harry Reed can be seen sitting on the right on the first trailer." Although it is not very clear, if you look closely, there's a dog sitting on Harry's lap. Henry Reed, better known as Harry during his lifetime, was born in Hereford in 1884. He was a member of the large Reed family from Gloucestershire, who were well known for their transport business. Harry was the 9th child of John Reed, a farmer, haulier and agricultural contractor. He married Alice Griffiths, a local girl, in 1902, when they were both 18 years old. Together they had 12 children, and from 1909 they lived in the Forest of Dean. Harry found employment driving a steam traction engine and by 1913 was in business himself using a Fowler road locomotive hauling timber and later cement from the Micheldean cement works to the Micheldean Road railway station for onward delivery. Once he was employed to move heavy machinery from Gravesend to the Micheldean cement works. The photograph here shows the engine with its load. The journey was about 190 miles, and there was probably an 8-man crew involved. The journey lasted about 3 weeks, which implies an average distance of about 10 miles a day, assuming a 6-day working week. The engine was acquisitioned by the army during the First World War, and for a short period Harry served in France with it. But this engine does not look the same as the one in the Hollow accident. Later, Harry operated a steamroller and was away from home for long periods. After the war, he acquired a Foden steam wagon and then his first petrol-driven lorry. Harry continued in business until 1941 and then retired. Afterwards, he lived in Longhope, where he and his wife Alice had a small farm rearing pigs and chickens. In Paul Heaton's book, Road Transport, The Reed Story, which was published in 2005, there is another photograph of the Hollow accident, this time taken from the opposite side. The caption reads, "The road under this traction engine collapsed, causing it to slip over at Ruardean Hill in 1916. Harry Reid can be seen crawling from under the vehicle, having inspected the damage. In the background, you can see the Nelson Inn, Morse Road, Drybrook." So, remarkably, we have two opposite photographs of the same accident. I guess this one was taken shortly after the accident happened. The site looks unorganised, and Harry Reid is apparently analysing the extent of the damage. I assume he wanted to see the state of the engine's motions, but climbing under a heavy engine on unstable ground must have been dangerous. The man at the front is the same person who was holding the handsaw in the first photograph. This time, he has a hammer in his hand. The dog is there again, standing close to him. Perhaps it belonged to one of the men, maybe Harry himself, especially if it is the dog sitting on his lap in the earlier timber transport photograph. But who is the third man? His clothing is slightly smarter, perhaps a nearby resident or passerby. From this viewpoint, it is easier to imagine the terrain's steep slope and why the accident turned out to be so dramatic. So, from an initial photograph, it is remarkable how much information and detail can be uncovered. The Ruardean Hill photographs tell a story of local people, related places, and recalls a shocking event. For Harry Reid and the men involved, it must have been the subject of their worst recurring nightmares for the rest of their lives.